Riftbound rules can be super confusing, and we've seen some crazy plays and tech over the past 2 weekends at Bologna and Las Vegas. So let's go through 8 more scenarios at 3 difficulty levels in today's episode of... If you'd like to skip to a question, timestamps are in the description. If there are any small mistakes, I'll leave a pinned comment. Larger mistakes or rules updates, and I'll post an update video. You are playing Blade Dancer as your legend. You have an exhausted Stalwart Poirot at base. You play Discipline, targeting it. Your opponent plays Defy, countering your Discipline. Are you able to use your Blade Dancer's ability to ready your Stalwart Poirot? Yes. Irelia's legend ability is a triggered ability. The trigger condition is when you choose a friendly unit, and the effect will follow the comma. That means as soon as you play the spell or use an ability that chooses a friendly target, this effect will trigger and go on the chain. This effect will go on chain regardless of whether the initial triggering spell or ability is removed from the chain, say by Defy or another counter spell. Now, this scenario is sometimes confused with another common scenario, when a triggered ability goes on the chain and the ability references here. For example, Leona determines attack trigger states stunner unit here. If you respond to this ability by, say, using a hidden fight or flight to return the Leona back to base, the attack trigger will no longer be able to stun that unit at the battlefield because Leona is no longer here. As this ability has a condition that must be satisfied in order to work, it checks that on resolution. Blade Dancer's ability doesn't have a condition that needs to be checked on resolution and is perfectly satisfied that you at some point chose your Poirot. Your opponent has 2 Vanguard Sergeants at base. You want them gone, and play Rocket Barrage repeated, with each instance dealing 4 damage to each of the Vanguard Sergeants. Your opponent attempts to play Defy. Given your Rocket Barrage is repeated, and you have paid 8 energy and 2 power to play the spell, is it a legal target for Defy? Yes. When determining the cost of playing a card, you do sum up the additional costs, such as repeat. However, cards such as Defy do not take into account additional costs when determining whether they can be played. Now, I covered this as a point of clarification in the Vex mini episode, but this scenario often causes confusion and is likely to keep coming up as more optional additional cost mechanics are printed into Riftbound, so I'll just reiterate it here. Discounts, taxes, and additional costs only affect when you are playing the card. After you play a card and it goes on the chain, the game won't remember what you did to play the card. So, when you play Defy, which needs to assess whether a spell is more than 4 energy or 1 power cost, the only information it has available to it is what's printed on the card itself. Lastly, remember that repeat does not put separate triggers on the chain, it essentially prints the same text that's being repeated back onto the card itself. So defying the spell counters the whole thing. You have 12 energy. You play Thousand Tail Watcher Accelerated and move it into the arena's greatest, initiating a combat showdown. You kill your opponent's unit, conquer and score. Then you play Arcane Shift on your Thousand Tail Watcher. Arcane Shift banishes the Thousand Tail Watcher, and you replay it and blast your opponent's unit for 3 damage. Can you pay the accelerate cost of Thousand Tail Watcher so you can move it in and conquer the other battlefield? And if yes, do you have to pay the 1 energy, 1 mind power for the accelerate cost? Yes, but you have to pay the accelerate cost of 1 energy and 1 mind power. Firstly, Arcane Shift directs you to play the card. Accelerate is an optional additional cost you pay when you play the unit with the ability. So even if a unit is played by a spell, if it has Accelerate, you can still use it. Second, despite Arcane Shift allowing you to play a unit at action speed for free, you still go through the same sequence of playing a unit as you normally would. This includes calculating the costs of the unit. When determining this, first you reduce the cost to 0 if an effect tells you to ignore the cost of the card, so in this case. Then you apply additional costs, including Accelerate. Then you apply cost increases and discounts. So while Arcane Shift allows you to ignore the base cost of Thousand Tail Watcher when you play it, you still have to pay for Accelerate. You are playing Jax, Grandmaster at Arms, and you have a Stalwart Poirot at base, which was equipped with Brutalizer during your last turn. Your opponent has a Vanguard Sergeant at a battlefield. You want your Poirot to be higher might to deal with the Vanguard Sergeant in combat. Can you use your Jax's legend ability to attach the Brutalizer back onto the Poirot, fulfilling Brutalizer's conditional passive ability and giving it an extra 2 might? Yes. Grandmaster at Arms allows you to attach and attach equipment you control to a unit you control. It does not specify that it must be moved from one unit to another. The act of attaching a card causes it to become detached from the card it is currently attached. Brutalizer's effect text is a conditional passive ability, which just wants you to have attached it this turn in order to give it the 2 might bonus. Note that this is not a trigger and will not give the unit increasingly higher amounts of might if it's reattached multiple times. If the condition is met, it gives it the +2 might, and if it isn't met, it doesn't. You have a playful Phantom at Reaver's Row. Your opponent moves their Draven Vanquisher into the battlefield, initiating a combat showdown. The attack trigger of Draven Vanquisher triggers, as does the defend trigger of Reaver's Row. Do you get to see whether your opponent pays a Fury power and increases Draven Vanquisher's might before you decide to use Reaver's Row and return your Phantom to base? No. Remember that triggers controlled by the attacking player go on the chain first, then triggers controlled by the defending player. Then, first in, last out, triggers controlled by the defending player resolve first. The Draven Vanquisher's trigger does ask you to pay a Fury power to gain +2 might, but your opponent will decide to do this on resolution of the ability, not when the ability goes on the chain. Bullet time functions in a similar way, meaning that you don't have to pay all your runes only to be completely wrecked by a Defy. So in this scenario, your best play is to return the Phantom to base in case your opponent decides to grow their Draven and live to fight another day. You have a Mind Splitter at a battlefield equipped with Last Rites. You are going through the beginning sequence of your turn, and you have 4 runes available. You have 6 cards in trash, including Rhasa the Sunderer. When the hold trigger from Last Rites triggers, are you able to play Rhasa from trash? No. Firstly, the sequence of the start of turn. Your beginning phase, including hold triggers, will occur before channeling 2 runes. So, unfortunately, your channeled runes for the turn will not be able to help you play Rhasa off Last Rites. Secondly, the sequence of playing spells. Remember that the Last Rites trigger still requires you to pay the cost of the card. When you choose Rhasa, Rhasa is removed from the trash and placed on the chain as a pending item. Then you calculate the costs of the card, including applying discounts such as from Rhasa's ability. Unfortunately, Rhasa is no longer in the trash at the time Rhasa is calculating his discount, so in this scenario the cost is reduced to 5 energy and 1 power, as only 5 cards now remain in the trash. That makes it unable to be played, so Rhasa will have to stay in the trash. Your opponent has Lucian Merciless attached with Trinity Force. You play Fading Memories on the Trinity Force and pass turn. Does your opponent score 2 points on the hold? 1 for the hold and 1 for the Trinity Force hold trigger? Yes. First, the sequence of the start of turn yet again. Temporary kills the permanent at the start of the beginning phase before holding and scoring. So you would think that Trinity Force being temporary will cause the equipment to die before the Trinity Force hold trigger goes off. The problem is that when you apply temporary to Trinity Force with Fading Memories, this becomes part of the rules text of the equipment. And astute viewers remember that when an equipment is attached to something, the rules text becomes inactive. This essentially turns Trinity Force into Spinning Axe, and just like how that equipment works, the Trinity Force will not be killed during your opponent's beginning phase while it's attached. So in this scenario, they will first score 1 for holding and 1 for the Trinity Force hold trigger. Your opponent has a Stellarcorn Herder and 2 Travelling Merchants at Void Gate. You play Bellow's Breath Repeated, targeting all 3 units at the battlefield for a total of 4 damage to each unit. Your opponent reacts by playing Flash, returning the 2 Travelling Merchants to base. What happens next? You choose either the Herder or the Merchants to die. This is a scenario where you have fulfilled the targeting restriction during the process of playing the spell, but unfortunately it won't fulfill the restriction on resolution. When this occurs, you must choose a subset of the original targets that fulfills the restriction. Bellow's Breath Repeated lets you choose up to 3 targets at one location twice. You can choose 2 different locations with each instance of Bellow's Breath effect. However, if you were to do that, you'd wind up dealing 2 damage to the Herder and 1 damage to each of the merchants, perfectly avoiding killing anything, so that probably isn't ideal. Instead, it will be your option to choose whether to deal 4 damage to the Stellarcorn Herder or 2 to each of the merchants. And that's all for today. This is the 4th episode I've done of this series, so if you haven't already, check out the rest of the episodes. Otherwise, let me know in the comments about any other scenarios that have been tickling your noodle, or might be useful for other people to learn from. And I'll catch you in the next one.